Good Tuesday morning to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Not much to really talk about on our weather front, but there are a couple notable things that are going on that are in the near vicinity of us. And I think the main talking point is going to be what that weekend forecast does entail. And that's going to be one of your main headlines. So summertime patterns still will remain in place, just like what we had yesterday, just like what we had Sunday, maybe with some slightly more impressive rain chances, but very minuscule improvements in those rain chances. Then we go into the weekend, and it's looking like it's going to be a pretty wet weekend. Obviously, with a lot of cloud cover and a lot of rain, it is going to help keep the temperatures down, but not the most opportune forecast for things like football Friday night, maybe going over to Montgomery to watch the Mercer Bears play, a pool day that you're trying to milk out that last little bit of summer. So we'll go over what the weekend is looking like on our long-range models here very shortly. Let's take a look at your current temperatures just before the 11 a.m. hour. Very similar to yesterday, some low to mid 80s, lots of 82s, 83s, and 84s, but we can see 85 at the warmest down in Rochelle. So that's the warmest temperature here in Central Georgia. How does that match up with kind of the deep south and the southeast United States? 87 in Jacksonville, 87 in Orlando. You can see another 87 over there in New Orleans, along with Little Rock in Arkansas. But taking the cake is going to be an 89 over in Dallas. So it looks like Texas is finally getting back on board with all of those warm temperatures that they are so accustomed to this time of year. But in terms of some cooler weather, it may be here to stay. So make sure that you're staying tuned to the very end of this extended forecast to hear what I'm going to talk about. A possible front looks to make its entrance into Central Georgia. Now this morning we had kind of a battleground of the light green and the dark green shades here on the dew point temperatures map. We have now seen this dark green color kind of take over all of Central Georgia, even some dew points in the upper 70s like you see in Wrightsville, Sandersville, along with that down in Cordele and Crisp County. So the humidity is going to play a factor on what the feels like numbers are, but we're not necessarily seeing that entrance of some slightly drier air. Actually, portions of southwest Georgia, a little bit abnormally dry in terms of not as much muggy air present in that corner of the state of Georgia. The southern portion of the state is normally kind of hovering with that very, very muggy air that is down in North Florida. But the drier air does remain farther up to the north, back up into North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, and closer to the Appalachian Mountains. So here's a look at your feels like numbers. Taking a look at a mix of 90s and 80s. If you do feel like the 80s, you're feeling like the mid to upper 80s. Eastman at 85 degrees, 84 over in Thomaston. And then a 95 in Gordon, matching the highest number that we see. The Unadilla and Cordele also feeling like 95 degrees. Definitely not as bad as it could be this time of the day, because we saw a couple weeks ago, we were already seeing 100s on this feels like temperatures map. But it is still a pretty warm start to the day, and it's going to be a warm afternoon all across Central Georgia once again. Here's a look at your winds and your wind gusts. We are seeing maybe a steady breeze of about 3 to 6 miles per hour in some localized areas. We see 6 miles per hour in Cochran, 6 miles per hour in Eastman, but we can see this blue shade trying to build in from the north and the northeast. We're going to have a bit of a weak wedge setup. It's not going to really pose any implications in terms of some cooler and drier air that we have been talking about with the wedge, but it is looking to maybe propel some showers and maybe even some storms in from that direction later this afternoon. So in terms of the numbers, 93 was our high temperature yesterday. That matches our high temperature that we hit on Sunday. We were right on par with our average low of 71 degrees yesterday here in Macon, and still well below record-breaking territory and well above record-breaking territory for the average, or the record high and the record low respectively. Back in 1948, we started out the morning at 63 degrees. That would feel very, very nice, but we did have some upper 60s in the forecast this morning. We will take what we can get. 104, the record back in 2000 for our high temperature, and yesterday was one of the few days in the month of August so far that we actually haven't recorded any rain at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. I think that marks about 6 or 7 days in the month of August, so we still have about 10 or 11 days that we have recorded rain at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. All in all, a day without rain didn't do much to our cushion, still hovering above 4 inches where we should be this time of year. And then sunrise yesterday was around 7 a.m., sunset was around 8:16. So remember, sunrise getting later and later, sunset is getting earlier and earlier as the days will continue to get shorter and shorter in terms of hours of daylight, all the way until we get just a few days before Christmas and that first official day of winter. So 2 days in a row hitting 93 degrees. Why not make it 3? Another hot one is in the forecast today. Better rain chances, at least compared to yesterday. But like I said, it's still looking like some pretty slim rain chances. 93 for a high temperature, so right there around average. But that's not factoring in the humidity. You want to know what it feels like outside as you're heading home, maybe heading out to recess. And you can see that the heat index graphic looking very similar to yesterday once again, topping out somewhere in the upper 90s for a good period of time throughout the afternoon hours. We could even see a 100, a 101. Wouldn't doubt that a couple areas like Cordele, Sandersville, Gordon, those areas that are typically a little bit muggier than the rest of central Georgia, see some of those heat indices above the triple-digit mark, but the general guidance is heat index values kind of up to the 100-degree mark for most of central Georgia today. Here's a live look at your satellite and radar picture. We had a few clouds in the forecast this morning. Didn't really do a good job of blocking anything in the way of sunlight, which was great for an image of the sunrise. However, it did contribute to a pretty quick warm-up, just like we saw yesterday. There is a good cluster of clouds just to the north of us, and it actually encapsulated a couple of sprinkle showers along the I-20 corridor. And then not really looking at much in the way of rain elsewhere across the state of Georgia. The closest rain that we can find is actually in the very far corner of South Carolina, getting up into kind of southwestern North Carolina. We do see a cluster of some storms trying to move in off the coast, probably going to clip areas like Cumberland Island and Jekyll Island just to the north of Jacksonville and in the southeast corner of the state of Georgia. So now taking a look at future view, let's see what is in store later this afternoon. We see a couple of scattered showers, maybe even a storm or two where you're seeing some of the yellows, maybe the orange colors. It does look like your rain chances are going to be a lot more impressive the farther north that you go today. So if you have to go up to Metro Atlanta a little bit later, maybe you're watching this forecast and then heading out to hit the road, that's where you'll probably start to run into a couple of spotty showers or even a storm. But still, these are just kind of speckled dots. It's kind of like you're dipping a paintbrush into a can of paint and then you're just flicking it all over the state of Georgia. And that's what we're going to continue to see into the late afternoon, evening, and maybe even into the nighttime hours, where we do start to see a couple of showers that linger into those overnight hours. So you see this timestamp right here. This isn't set in stone necessarily, but don't be surprised if you wake up to a couple of light showers and some sprinkles for that morning commute tomorrow. We'll have a brief dry period as we transition into the second half of the day on Wednesday, before more scattered rain chances bubble up into the picture. Along with that, kind of your partly cloudy skies. Those rain chances, just like today, will continue into the late afternoon and into the evening hours. And then before you know it, we'll go into the nighttime hours. Activity fizzles out. And then once again, maybe some rain welcoming you out the door on Thursday morning. It's not going to be anything heavy in nature, not going to be of the thunderstorm nature. We're just looking at a couple spotty showers to be possible, and this is definitely not set in stone. But now Thursday afternoon is a bit different from at least Tuesday and Wednesday. I think that Thursday is going to have the best potential for seeing some scattered showers and some storms in nature. It does look like maybe actually most areas in central Georgia could catch some rain. And then we see some of that is really lingering into the nighttime hours, all the way past midnight into 1 a.m. on Friday, where we still see some pockets of some of the orange and some of the red colors that could indicate some thunderstorms trying to get going a little bit later in the day. Not necessarily sure I really believe that lasting that late into the night, but I do believe we have the potential for some evening and nighttime rain. And don't be surprised if you do see some flashes of lightning off in the distance. That's obviously a big thing that people see in the summertime, and they refer to it as heat lightning. Well, heat lightning is not a real thing. Any kind of lightning that you are seeing in the night sky is just the lightning associated with a thunderstorm a good distance away. And it's just a little bit too far away to hear anything in the way of thunder, but since it's night, we get a little bit better visibility of those flashes of lightning. So over the next 3 days, there's not many talking points really besides the increase in rain chances from Tuesday into Wednesday all the way into your Thursday afternoon. Now, we may backtrack this just a little bit, but I really just wanted to highlight that increase in rain chance. And obviously, of any day of the midweek, Thursday is going to be your best shot at receiving some rain. But your average high, 92 degrees this time of year. Looks like we're going to flirt with that 93-degree mark each and every day. Now, we'll probably teeter-totter it a little bit, maybe a 92 or a 94 that starts to pop up. But as it stands right now, if we do hit the 93-degree mark Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 5 days in a row at that temperature mark, and it definitely could be a whole lot worse, but it is still going to be hot. feels like numbers near the 100-degree mark is definitely not something that you want to spend an extended amount of time outside under. But then there is a pattern change Friday into Saturday, and that will continue into the weekend ahead. These 2 days are going to be below the 90-degree mark right now because we do have increased rain chances in terms of the coverage. The rain looks to be a lot more widespread. And along with that, we look to have some more cloud cover in the picture. So it should not allow those temperatures to rise up close to average, above the 90-degree mark. And we could even see a steady downtick in these numbers. I believe I was forecasting 90 yesterday for Friday. Now I have 89 on there. So if we continue to see that downward trend, we continue to see those rain chances pop up pretty early in the afternoon. Most areas are probably not going to reach that average high or have a chance to get really warm somewhere into the 90s. I will take any day that I can forecast in August that is below the 90-degree mark. If we have an 8 in front of that number, that is good news. It's just going to come at the cost of a fairly messy forecast, especially on Saturday, where you see that temperature is around 85 degrees. But now let's take a look at your muggy meter. And normally not too many talking points with this, but I mentioned yesterday how we like to look at this graphic in order to try to see an implication, or an indication rather, I should say, of maybe some slightly drier air entering the forecast. And that can be indicative of a frontal boundary moving through during this time of year. Well, I do believe I'm seeing a slight indication of it. You see the downtick in the dew point temperatures and the humidity levels from Sunday all the way down into Monday. It's going into that lower half of the humid box, dew point temperatures in the 60s. And yes, it's still a noticeable humidity, but we don't really see those big sweeping fronts usher in some dew point temperatures in the 50s or the 40s this time of year during the summertime months. We have to transition more into the fall season before we really see that non-existent humidity whatsoever. But any slight downtick in the humidity can really do a good job at inhibiting those rain chances. And if you have the entry of some drier air, obviously the cold fronts always have the potential for some slightly cooler air, so we'll talk more about that at the very end of this, but we can get a good indication about what's going on according to these long-range models. So first and foremost, you saw Hurricane Erin. That's up there to the northeast on the top right of your screen. It's continuing to move off the Atlantic coast as we go into the end of the work week. And again, Hurricane Erin is not going to impact our forecast whatsoever. It is going to have some implications along the Atlantic coast, mainly of states like Virginia, getting into the Chesapeake Bay area, over here on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. But there will be increased rip currents and increased surf all along the Atlantic coast, starting actually as soon as this afternoon all the way down in Miami, closer to where Erin is currently located. But as it continues to push up, you have any plans to travel to the Atlantic coast of Georgia, say St. Simon's Island, Tybee Island, Savannah, that's where you're probably going to see some of the rough seas and some of the increased rip currents. And it's got a very strong wind field. It is still a very strong storm as of right now, so it can have implications way out beyond the center of the actual storm. But now let's talk about our forecast back here at home. So what is going to happen is we're going to have high pressure up to the north of us by the time we roll into the end of this week. And then right over here, Hurricane Erin is a big center of low pressure. So as Erin gets closer and closer, that wind field's going to start to dominate our forecast. Low pressure centers, follow my hand right here, they have this counterclockwise rotation. So kind of on the north and northwest side of that, you're going to see winds kind of coming down like this. They're going to come in maybe from the northeast, just slightly up from the north, basically on the northwest side of that low pressure center. Well, the high pressure up to the north of us is also trying to influence our flow, and high pressure flows the exact opposite way in the clockwise direction. So when you have those two centers of pressure right there, you have high pressure spinning this way, you have low pressure that's going to be spinning this way. It can kind of act as a funnel right there. So it could lead to a bit of a wedge setup as we go into the next couple of days, kind of trying to get that breeze out of the north and northeast. But we're still going to hold on to the moisture for a couple of days. I think the wedge is really going to influence our forecast in terms of more widespread cloud cover, but plenty of moisture still in the forecast. It does look like we have some pretty increased rain chances, specifically Friday afternoon into Friday evening. And I know that's when many of you are wanting to tailgate for the high school football games, head out to the stadiums. It's best to go ahead and plan on bringing the umbrella and the poncho for any football games that you're participating or attending later on at the end of this week. And I know it's a messy week too, but we'll be very thankful for the cooler temperatures at the very least. Typically we have these football Friday nights in the month of August, and we're dealing with some upper 90s, and it's feeling well above the triple digits. So at least it's not going to be blistering hot, but it will probably be a messy night on the gridiron. Now we take it into Friday at 8 p.m. right here. So we'll talk about number one. Obviously we see our fair share of widespread rain, and typically when we've seen this a couple days into the future, we've been throwing maybe a 40% chance of rain on your 7-day forecast. Well, yesterday I elected to go with 60, and I still am electing to go with the 60% because I see the overlapping of these green and these blue shades. That means there's pretty good model agreement that somewhere in the southeast, may not be specifically central Georgia. Right now it looks like the best agreement is farther to the east of us, going down I-16 towards the coast, that there will be some form of some pretty heavy precipitation, some thunderstorms, some heavy showers. But it does look like this overlapping area has remained pretty consistent over the last 24 hours, at least of my looking, that we are going to see some widespread rain in the southeast. Now Saturday doesn't look quite as impressive, but this still is showing a good amount of overlapping as we go into the second half of your Saturday. We could maybe just see this cloud cover and rain stick around during the overnight hours on Friday and continue into a messy Saturday morning. So of course, once again, not the best for any outdoor plans that you have as we roll into the weekend, but it does look like the cloud cover and the rain will continue to maybe just inhibit that warm up and keep temperatures at bay. That's why I think Saturday is going to be a little bit cooler, a couple degrees cooler than what I have forecasted for your Friday, because most of Friday we're going to try to warm up accordingly until the rain chances get going in the afternoon. Now we go into Sunday, and Sunday you are starting to see not much overlap whatsoever. You are still seeing the shaded areas of green and the shaded areas of blue. However, it does look fairly broken in nature, so I'm not as confident in the widespread rain chances on Sunday. So that's why you will see a downtick in the rain chances. And take a look at what happens by the time we flash forward to Monday. Yeah, no rain whatsoever. So we're talking about that slightly drier air that could indicate a frontal boundary. And it does look like by the time we go into the second half of Monday, that cold front does try to push down into the state of Georgia. And hopefully it can bring some cooler temperatures with it. I still have a good stretch of days that are forecasted below average and somewhere in the upper 80s. But if we could get those numbers to go down even a little bit more, no complaints whatsoever. That is very rare for the summertime months to have temperatures forecasted below average and somewhere in the 80s. Along with that, our fair share of pretty pleasant skies. I mean, we may have some cloud cover, it does look like, but this is far from set in stone. This is still really far out in the future. We're just trying to get a good indication of what's going on next week. And right now, go ahead and mark it down in pencil. It does look like we're going to have a front come through, but to the extent of what we feel the impacts of that is still kind of not set in stone, and we're still really trying to determine that. We'll have to get a clearer picture, and that will come into clearer focus as we get closer and closer. Long-range models go all the way out to Tuesday at 4 p.m. So now let's talk some tropics. Hurricane Erin. Hurricane Erin has been really changing its status as of lately. It rapidly intensified from a Category 2 into a Category 5 Saturday into Sunday. Then later Sunday, it started undergoing what we call that eye wall replacement cycle. So that's where kind of the inner eye wall gets really strong, but you have another eye wall just outside of that that tries to overtake it. So what it does, the outer wall tries to suffocate the inner wall, and it does lead to some weakening and de-intensification. But once that replacement cycle is complete, then the inner eye wall starts to get going again, and then it starts to intensify once again. So Hurricane Erin, as of Sunday, was a Category 5 hurricane, and then as we went into the later hours on Sunday, it underwent the eye wall replacement cycle, went down into a Category 3 storm, and yesterday it re-intensified back into a Category 4 storm. Well, as of the latest update, as of 8 a.m., doesn't look like we have the 11 a.m. update in just yet, 110 mile per hour winds, which are still very strong, don't get me wrong, but this is the very upper end. This is the top threshold that your winds can be to be a Category 2 storm as opposed to a Category 3. If you get 111 mile per hour winds, which I do imagine that Erin is just right there around, and we do see on the cone right here, Erin is forecasted to strengthen back into a Category 3 very briefly as we go into Thursday. You should still treat this as it is a major hurricane. I know it's Category 2 status. That's not necessarily the criteria for a major hurricane, but we are going to treat it like that, as it is a very high-end Category 2. The good news is we have been seeing some steady signs of weakening. This pressure now up to 958 millibars, which is still pretty strong, but yesterday it was somewhere around 933, 935 millibars. So it is good to see that gain in pressure. So the higher that your pressure gets and the closer you get to that 1,000 millibar mark, that's where you're going to see substantial weakening within a tropical system. And its movement has slowed. It was moving at about 13 miles per hour yesterday. Now it's down to 7 miles per hour. It's not too far off where it was located this time yesterday. It was just north of Turks and Caicos. Now it's just to the east of the Bahamas, but it is expected to start to gain some speed over the next couple of days, but it will be pretty steady progress. This is Thursday at 2 a.m. right around here, 115 mile per hour winds. And then as it makes its way kind of along the Atlantic coast, right there when it gets kind of parallel to South and North Carolina, that's when it's going to begin a more northeasterly direction, and that's when it's going to continue to try to move off the coast of the United States. But areas like Bermuda and coastal areas of the Carolinas and Virginia are still probably going to feel the impacts of Hurricane Erin. Like I said, there's a large wind field associated with this storm, and we're also looking at that counterclockwise rotation. So by the time it gets to, say, right around here in the cone, you see that rotation right there. Well, the winds are going to be blowing inshore. So the farther north that it moves, that's where you're going to start to see some of those winds start to push inshore, and that can lead to some increased water levels and even possibly some storm surge, which we do have some storm surge warnings for the Outer Banks of North Carolina, along with the tropical storm watch, which means tropical storm force winds. That means winds anywhere from 39 to 73 miles per hour are going to be probable within the next 48 hours, and then that can be upgraded into a warning, which I wouldn't doubt that we see by the end of today. So Erin will continue to move up to the north and the northeast as it rides along the Atlantic coast, really threading the needle between the mid-Atlantic and Bermuda right here. So thankfully not making landfall on any major land masses, and you can see as it continues to move into those cooler waters, the higher latitudes that you go in the Atlantic Ocean, that's where you'll start to see Category 2 down to a Category 1 and eventually a low pressure system by the time we go into the end of the weekend, Sunday at 3:30 in the morning. 75 mile per hour winds, which are still quite strong, but it's not going to be doing anything besides stirring up the fish and stirring up the currents in the North Atlantic. So unless you have a deep sea fishing excursion planned well off the coast of the United States, you're looking to be good from Hurricane Erin. So that back here at home in central Georgia, not going to pose any impacts except for kind of influencing our setup for our forecast as we go closer and closer towards the weekend. But it's not just Hurricane Erin out there. We do have two other areas of potential development now to monitor. This is as of the 8 a.m. update. So for these areas of development, we'll get the updates every 6 hours. We're getting updates on Erin now just about every 3 hours because there's active watches and warnings associated with it. But first and foremost, this is the system we have been monitoring for the last couple of days. It's this tropical wave that's been moving off the coast of Africa, and you can see that there is still a good amount of dust right over here in this portion of the Atlantic Ocean, and it's still got a little bit of that dust cloud to get through right here before it finally moves into a more conducive environment for formation. And it looks like it's going to really follow that path of where Hurricane Erin is right now very directly. And then once you get past this, it obviously is kind of anyone's guess about where the potential path is going to go. You can look at the long range models, but they're just going to give you an initial guess of all the conditions that they're seeing as of right now. And it's best not to put too much stock into anything past about the week time frame. So taking a look at the chances of formation now, yesterday it was about 0 and 50%. Well, now we have a slim chance of development over the next 2 days. It's only 10%, but it does mean that the chances are getting greater and greater for a 48-hour period of seeing some formation. And I really think we'll see a steady uptick in that over the next couple of days as it moves out of that dust plume cloud. 60% chance of developing over the next 7 days, so it does look increasingly likely that past that 48-hour window, we will get another storm that is going to develop. But it may not be the next storm to actually get a name, because now take a look at this tropical wave that is just moving off the west coast of Africa. Right now it's kind of located just south of Cape Verde, those islands right there off the west coast of Africa. 30% chance of developing over the next 2 days, over the next 7 days. So obviously that's not as great as that 60% chance, but that 30% over the next 48 hours is looking like a greater chance than what our other system does have. And this is mainly because there's kind of a gap in that Saharan dust. It's located farther to the north, farther to the northwest of this potential area of development. So that's kind of why it's moving off the coast of Africa, already running into a more conducive environment for developing than the system ahead of it. So this could become our next named storm, but nonetheless, we have two areas that are right behind Erin, kind of following a similar path. We definitely need to keep a very diligent eye on them. And of course, if they are going to pose any risk to our forecast here, we'll be the first to let you know. But right now, it's just about kind of informing you about what's out there. And then as we continue to see formation, we continue to see some strengthening, we continue to get cone models, spaghetti plots, then we can give you a better prediction about what's actually going to happen. But nothing to really worry about as of right now. But those two systems, does look like they could claim the next couple of names on the 2025 list. And that would be Fernand, and that would also be Gabrielle, the G name. So that would be the 6th and the 7th named storms of hurricane season. So your 7-day forecast back here, don't worry about the tropics because they're not going to influence this. It does look like Friday and Saturday, widespread rain, widespread cloud cover. That will help keep the temperatures at bay. And we still have some pretty decent rain chances Sunday before we go into Monday. And I know it looked completely dry on the long range models, but this is still pretty far out in the future. And we have to see some good agreement over the next couple of days in order for us to completely take that rain chance away. But by the time we get to say Thursday, I may completely take that rain chance away if the long range models continue to show what they have today. High temperatures in the 80s, below the 90-degree mark for a good stretch of days. So all in all, it's just a slight cool down. It's not going to really be a major cool down by any means, but any form of cooler temperatures we can get in the summertime months is definitely going to be a welcome sight. And speaking of that frontal boundary, let's take a look at the end of your 7-day forecast. So we show you these a lot when we go into the weekends, and you can see lots of deep blue up around the Great Lakes region of the United States. But this is your 6 to 10-day temperature outlook. So it's going to be valid from August 24th to the 28th, getting into the end of next week. It does look like a good probability of seeing some below normal temperatures. And obviously the farther south that you go, not indicating that the front's going to make its passage too far down to the south because Florida is still forecasted above normal, but near normal high temperatures and low temperatures somewhere in the southern extent of central Georgia. But the farther north that you go, the chances get greater and greater of seeing some below normal temperatures. If we could welcome in another stretch of the 80s, that would not be a bad thing whatsoever. And this is a very good indication of a front trying to move through because the farther north that you travel, that's obviously a little bit farther behind the passage of that frontal boundary. So that's why you're seeing the greater probability of below average temperatures. Up in the Great Lakes that you saw a flash of, that's one of the deepest blue colors I've seen on this temperature outlook in quite some time. So hopefully we can keep the relief around for just a little bit longer. That's going to do it for your extended forecast today. However, be sure to tune in once again tomorrow at 10:30. We'll have an updated look at your forecast and we'll talk all things tropics that you need to know. Thanks for tuning in.